Oh God, I don't normally record these sessions because I don't want people to miss out on discussion. I want them to show up, but I'm going to record this one because of special circumstances. So um, I want to start by saying this period again. I keep saying this in this class, and it's true, but it doesn't. And I don't want my repetition to sort of water down any of the significance of what I apply to each week. But it's amazing how much stuff that happens in this period and related to these things still relates to modern day life. And for instance, I put up a podcast about birthright citizenship, which was partly about contemporary politics nowadays, but also has some stuff in it about the Chinese Exclusion Act and about the nature of citizenship and everything, and how that sort of developed in the country. So although I keep saying that, we keep living with these problems in America, but in fact we do, and it's not that these problems all have or these issues all have exact solutions and we keep missing them. It's just that it's one of these historical things that the tensions are long-standing, and the ideas about the United States are changing a lot. And so it's not surprising that the United States, for instance, goes through periods like this where they start to build an overseas empire, even though the idea originally wasn't to do that. And the original idea seems to have new imperialism seems to go against some of the ideas of what the founding generation said. So I don't know why I went on that discourse, except to say that, I sometimes worry that what happens is people think Reconstruction, and then they think World War I, and the stuff that happens in between isn't all that important. Well, the stuff that happens in between is extremely, extremely important. So again, we can't go into groups on Zoom, or maybe we could. Maybe there's some way to do it, but I doubt it, or I don't know how to do it. So let's start. Let me first of all check my email to see if people are asking why we're not there in class. No, okay. All right. So let's talk about what we're here to talk about, and that is this new period of empire, and also about nativism and things like that are in your discussion agenda. If we take question one, how did American foreign policy change in the late 19th century? Before we answer the specifics, what is kind of the big issue? What's the big change that's made? This sort of relates to last week's discussion of the frontier thesis from Frederick Jackson Turner and the West and all that stuff.
The overarching theme seems to be about imperialism and America spreading out across the world and intervening in different nations.
Yeah. Now, why is that different from the United States constantly expanding from the very, very early days until this period? I mean, after all, we've talked about the West. I mean, George Washington and all those people couldn't have conceived of of California being something, they couldn't have conceived of the or I don't, maybe they could have conceived of it, but they wouldn't likely have thought it was, they wouldn't have thought it was likely that the United States would develop the way it is. What's different between what happens here and, say, the Louisiana Purchase in the early 19th century?
It could be that we're intervening in other sovereign nations as opposed to other European colonies within our own continent.
Uh-huh. What might Native American groups say to that conception? Say about that conception? In other words, is in the long view of things, is American imperialism in this period really all that different from moves west and the Cherokee removal and all that kind of stuff?
Not terribly different, no.
Okay. Well, what the question does say, how does foreign policy change? And I think, first of all, the answer that Cecilia gave is central. First of all, it changes because the United States is now starts to act more like France and Britain and Germany, to a lesser extent Germany, because Germany is very slow, well, slowish in this game. How else does it change? By the way, let's put the now that we're in the sort of wake of the Super Bowl, let's put the United States on a sort of ranking system of world powers. Where does the United States rank in 1880 in terms of power among other nations? Now it's 1880 now.
It's absolutely competing successfully with powers like Britain, and France, and Germany as well.
Well, I think if you think of 1880, though, it isn't. It is later, by 1898, right? The United States is sort of a second-rate power, on the world stage, right? Until really the late 1880s, early 1890s. Okay, and that sort of leads us into this next question: what arguments did Americans make to support interventions abroad? One of them is, by the way, the United States needs to compete with other powers on the world stage. That's not as emphasized in the book as it should be, but there are a lot of other reasons too.
Now that conquering the West frontier is over, they're looking to re-energize the nation. And some people viewed this imperialism aspect as a way to re-energize the nation by taking control of things all over the world and putting their foot in the door in different nations.
Okay, that's right. That's very much the Teddy Roosevelt argument that Teddy Roosevelt, before Frederick Jackson Turner, thinks that this idea of the West is the frontier closing is important to America and the development of America. And he even goes as far as to say that American manhood is starting to suffer because there are no more worlds to conquer, right? That one of the things that the country needs is almost constant growth in order to test its strength, in order to make itself strong as its own country within its own borders, right? What else? Remember, what's also going on at the same time? The other big thing Oh, someone has just pinged us from the outside world. Oh, that's not. I thought that was mail. It's not mail. That's really odd. Okay. What else is going on at the same time? Post-Civil War, what's the other big change? We talked about it all last week.
You mean the shift from a more agrarian economy to a more industrialized one, or is it the civil rights?
Well, the civil rights is important, but in this case, I was thinking about the second industrial revolution and the shift to a more industrialized economy. Why is that important for imperialism? Well, why is that used as a justification, which is what the actual question is?
I don't know how much this actually justifies anything, but it was easier to do. It was easier to travel longer distances, communicate with people far away.
Yes, that's one thing. It is easier to do. But Skylar is saying to continue to help the U.S. boom and grow. How would it? Sorry, hang on a second. Let's have a fit. How does imperialism, the way it happens in this period, help the United States, or at least in theory, what was the motivation, the justification behind saying it would help the U.S. boom and grow? This is an absolute key element in the arguments Americans make to support intervention abroad. Skylar, you're a national market. Who said that? Alexis. Yeah. There comes a point at which Americans, especially those industrializing, believe that the market for American goods within the continental United States, right? And even including Canada and Mexico, because remember, Mexico is still a slightly divided country at this stage, is too small. What the Industrial Revolution has done is create this boom in, for instance, Singer sewing machines, as I talked about it in the lecture. We can't possibly say no one wants 4 Singer sewing machines in their house, but we want the Singer company, and I'm just using that as an example, want the Singer company to keep thriving and to keep producing and to keep selling, and all those things, all the standard arguments made about better markets, better capitalism. Well, the only way we can do that is to expand overseas and open up those markets. Now, here, let me just throw this in there, because this is something, again, your book probably doesn't cover maybe as well as it should. But remember that since even under slavery, and well, since the invention of the development of a really effective cotton gin, and you know, the United States has been an exporting country in terms of cotton. I mean, just enormous amounts of cotton. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why, as we've talked so many times in class, one of the reasons why Southern slave owners start to change their attitude towards slavery and see it as a positive good in the 19th century. That's one of the reasons why the what is called the West, when in this case, we really mean the Southwest, Alabama and Mississippi and even Louisiana become states, right? It's because that all that cotton area and all that sugar area needs, not sugar, but all that cotton area and all that rice area needs a powerful government to help the market grow. Well, so it isn't as if once the second industrial revolution starts, everyone in the United States says, oh my God, we've got to have foreign markets and we have to invent a whole new process to set them up. That's not exactly true. There already is a process. Cotton is already being sold. Now, Egyptian and Indian cotton, because the cotton gin and other technologies are having effects there, are competing with American cotton on foreign soil after the Civil War, probably competing better than before the Civil War. But of course, the American economy has changed as well. So it's the it's the idea that whereas before we were selling cotton was our overwhelmingly biggest export. Now we are exporting everything. Do you see what I mean? And that, in order to keep the economy going, keep the American way of life going, we need to export everything. But there's another sort of ideology that follows on from that is very important in American life, in the arguments for this new imperialism. What is that? I argue it happens after the market for industrial goods happens. Remember the Pears soap ad that you saw in the lecture? Oh, Alyssa got kicked out. You're back in now, okay. Is it just about opening markets, or are there other justifications? Were there other justifications? National security, true. That's Nolan, that's exactly right, because after all, in this period of second imperialism, or this great imperialism period, it looks like Britain and France and to some extent Germany are carving up the world. If the United States doesn't get involved, it's going to be behind, or possibly, I think, Nolan, as you're implying, lead to weakness with other powers. Remember, sorry, I didn't want to turn this into a lecture. But in many ways, the second phase of European imperialism, where they take control of large areas of land, is kind of a new thing. Okay. And so when you see British India becoming imperialized rather than colonized, and China being sort of carved up by various nations, it looks as if in order to be a powerful nation, you have to be in on this or you're going to be carved up. But that's a sort of side thrust of what I was originally getting at. What's the other sort of moral or ideological reason for imperialism? What does Kipling say? Rudyard Kipling, what does he ask the United States to do? Take up the What? Well, let me go to here and show you. Share screen. Can you see this?
Yes.
What does it say?
The white man's burden.
Yeah, what does that mean? What this is of course the Kipling poem, but which then turned into an ad for soap. What does it mean? What's the white man's burden? By the way, I never really, let's see if I get a bigger version of this. Hang on a second. I want to see if I can get a higher resolution. Can probably get a higher resolution and show you, because I often don't adequately oops, crap. I don't adequately look at this picture. Hang on one second, stay with me here. No. It's not what I wanted to do. .jpg. All right. This should be a better resolution. Okay. Whenever I look at this, I always look at the center figure, the captain of the ship or whatever, who's washing his hands. Okay. But let's look at some of the other things going on here. What on earth is going on in the bottom? Sorry, what on earth is going on here? Can you see that well enough?
Yeah, pretty well. It looks like it's a white person being out a black person, and I think that the theme that they're kind of going for is bringing civilization to the so-called uncivilized world.
Right. And in this instance, in the bottom right, there's this missionary. By the way, this is a picture of a missionary. It's not quite as clear as it should be. Is giving this Aboriginal person Pear's soap. Okay, now see what Nolan has written here. Yes, the idea that whites have to take care of and support those who are not white, such as natives in the US, right, Native Americans, and also in the Philippines. It's an extremely important justification. Now we can argue, and people do argue till the end of time, was this the motivating factor first, or did this sort of come after as a justification to explain why to explain the fervor for selling products abroad, the fervor for opening up international markets, the fervor for all that kind of stuff? I tend to think it's the latter, that this the economic things are usually the determining factor of what starts, and then afterwards you can get these kind of justifications. I'm going to stop share. I don't want people. I get so much email with the university now that it'll constantly ping. So that's another important motivating or another important reason why Americans do this. Okay, very important reason. So make sure when answering this question, just don't talk about markets. Markets are also then later justified. Okay. Now, question 3, how was the question of immigration tied up with American imperialism? After all, we have lots of periods of immigration in the United States, but this second great wave of immigration is happening at the same time as this imperialism is happening or is starting.
I think a lot of people kind of viewed it as a monument to the greatness of our nation, how other people are going to cross the sea to get over here to just pursue the American dream. Well, I think you're muted.
Muted, yeah. Yes, that's certainly true. Some people do think that. What else? What's the reaction to this second wave? What are some of the reactions to this second wave of immigration?
Some people were uncomfortable with it, the second wave, because they wanted American racial identity to be somewhat solidified.
Yes. And who do they who's coming in this second wave? This late 19th century, early 20th century wave. Okay, Nolan Tyler got good points in the chat, but let's hold that for 1 second. Let's hold those for 1 second. Where are these people coming from, and why is it a new thing? The Chinese is a huge one. Yes, China is another one. Also, Slavic peoples, Russian peoples, peoples from Southeastern Europe. Well, big deal. What difference does that make? What's the difference between those people, that immigration, and the immigration that even started the white version of the country back in the 17th century, or Irish immigration in the 1840s and 50s? Why is this different from that? Okay, Nolan's on the case here. It's seen as a lower class of people, almost a lower class of human, right? In some ways, there's an intensification of immigration as a race question rather than just an immigration question. Is that what your book argues? It's one thing to have Irish immigrants in the 1840s, but A, they speak English, B, they're white. Not to say they weren't discriminated against, they were, but it's a whole nother order of magnitude for darker skinned Southeastern Europeans to come over who don't speak English, Slavs to come over, Russians to come over. And then, of course, especially in the West, but not only in the West, Chinese to come over. So that's an important. The question is how does the question of immigration tied up with American imperialism? Well, if there is this big immigration move, partly because of your American imperialism, there also has to be a movement by the United States to civilize other parts of the world. Okay? Because we can't have the argument was at the time by racists, we can't have dirty, unwashed foreigners who don't know anything about English or don't know our ways of life coming over. Now, if they do happen to know what, if they do happen to, if we civilize them, then it might be a different story. But we have to civilize them first, I think is the key. Okay, question 4 is about nativism. Now, before we go too far down this road, okay, sorry. Cecilia's really hitting it out of the park today. It's written in the chat. The reading refers to those immigrants as strange and foreign peoples, and that American purity. Yes, I forgot that concept. That's a very important one. American purity is at risk due to this wave of immigration. Right? Extremely important. So how does nativism then shape American immigration? And most importantly, we have to make sure to get this right. What when we talk about nativism in this period, what are we talking about?
Whether or not you were born in the US.
Yes. So it's not necessarily about Native Americans. It's but it's really about Native people who have immigrated here a while ago, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. What role does it play?
I want to say it's like a social stature thing almost. You gotta forgive me. I forget what amendment it was that they had passed that determined that birth in the U.S. rules you as citizen.
14.
14. There you go. Thank you. But I think that can be used to the advantage of people who were born here and to the disadvantage of those who weren't.
Right. Okay. So isn't that kind of related to question 3 in the sense that, on the one hand, there's the white man's burden, but on the other hand, there's also the to civilize people abroad. But on the other hand, there's like, at home, there's like, there are too many immigrants anyway. The people who came here, quote, first should be given priority. This is most clearly seen in treatment of Chinese people, treatment of Chinese immigrants. There's a crucial fact here I want you to remember or want you to know, and I thought it was covered in the book, maybe it's not. Chinese, and this is really technical and sort of nitpicky for the people of the time to think this and argue this and base their policies and their attitudes on this. But Chinese immigrants in this period, the Chinese emperor still held and believed and said that any person of Chinese birth or descent is beholden to the Chinese emperor. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you live. If you're Chinese, your first responsibility is to the emperor in Beijing. Your first loyalty, I should say, must be to the emperor in Beijing. And so nativists in America said, well, look, we can't, Irish immigrants don't, well, sorry, I'm about to say one more thing about that in a minute, but British immigrants who become Americanized don't, the King of England does, the Queen of England doesn't claim, Queen Victoria doesn't claim that, the grandson of a British subject who moved to the United States owes his loyalty first to Queen Victoria and maybe second to the United States or something like that. That British, if you have British blood, it trickles down through the generations, and you have to, and your primary loyalty is to the home country. This is the argument that nativists were making. They also, by the way, make this about Catholics, because I think technically the Pope said there's a papal decree in 1871, which includes a lot of things, but says that Catholics everywhere in the world owe allegiance to the Pope. And since technically the Pope is also a secular leader, in addition to an ecclesiastical leader, people argue that Catholics have divided loyalties between their loyalty to Washington, D.C. and their loyalty to Rome. This even lasts until 1960, in the presidential campaign of 1960. So now this is all hogwash, obviously, because if a Chinese immigrant believes that deep down, they're never going to leave China. Okay, and Chinese Americans who are born here, especially 2 or 3 generations down the road, they've never been to China. They don't know anything about the emperor, or as American as everybody else. But the nativism is so strong that nativists look for every possible justification for their racism and their belief that certain groups of people, especially Asians, owe their loyalty to will always be disloyal to the United States. And also, I have to say this and it sounds a little bit problematic because it's using the word native in 2 different ways, but they also believe that, some of them also believe that Native Americans can never be loyal to the American government because they are essentially their own cultures, their own countries, their own people, their own tribes, if you will. In fact, there are people right after the Civil War that say, well, we can't have African Americans as citizens, right? That doesn't mean they can't live here, but they can't be citizens. That, of course, is, as Nolan says, or somebody says, overwhelmed by the 14th Amendment. But all these things are very, very strong, and they all share this one thing, and that is they're all after the fact justifications for underlying racial or ethnic attitudes. Okay. So let me just take it up to 1960s just for the hell of it. So if John Kennedy runs for the Democratic nomination for president, and no one knows, let's just say for the sake of argument, this is not true, but say for sake of argument, no one knows that he's Catholic. They just assume he's Protestant or whatever. Then they might have all kinds of things they don't like about Kennedy. They don't like him. He's a Northeasterner. He seems to be this hardcore cold warrior. All kinds of arguments you can make for not supporting Kennedy, that he's too young, all kinds of stuff. But when you find out he's Catholic, then all of a sudden, boom, oh, well, now wait a minute. That's a much bigger deal. He has loyalty to the Pope. The Pope gets on the phone and calls him and says, the American divorce laws are too liberal and they need to, and it's against the Catholic teaching. Therefore, you need to veto them. And the argument that anti-Catholics made in 1960 was that that Kennedy would listen to the Pope rather than listening to Congress. Okay. Now, before knowing he's Catholic, they wouldn't say that. If you see what I mean? So there is this kind of knee-jerk nativism that's always there, and I hate to say it, but you even see it in the 21st century. You know, how many zillions of YouTube videos do we have to see where someone walks up to a couple of Chinese people in Chinese Americans in a grocery store who are talking to them with each other in Chinese or anything, or Korean or anything, or any language, and some, oh God, there's no one, some what people now call Karens walk up to them and turn on their phone and start screaming at them to speak only in English and start making racist stereotypal comments about Chinese people and Chinese language and stuff like that. You see that. Well, you certainly did see that a lot in the election. Whenever an election comes up, things always get intensify. But, you know, we've seen an awful lot of that recently, and this is 140 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act. 100 and ish. So sorry, I took this down several routes and I didn't mean to go down that way, but foreignness, when it's exacerbated by either by a foreign power claiming loyalty, although this is a minor thing, the emperor or the Catholic Church, language differences, what's seen as racial differences, what's seen as ethnic differences, when those things are combined, then the anti-immigration sentiment becomes easier because you can latch your justification onto that kind of stuff. Right? You've seen these YouTube videos, yeah? Am I mistaken?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean maybe they only crop up during elections, but they were certainly very prominent in 2020 and 2016. I shouldn't say Karens because that's just that's a slur in its own sort of way. Okay, question 5 is, what role did American women play in imperialism? I want this to be a two-part question: imperialism, but also nativism and attitudes towards immigrants and things like that. Hang on, let me take some more cough medicine because somebody go ahead and start spouting off. This is an important part of understanding attitudes in the country. What are some of the female suffragists argue? Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for instance.
Women are working as representatives of American business in a lot of different ways at this time. And they are also serving as missionaries and teachers and medical professionals, kind of branching out along with the nation. And they were in such a unique position of moral and spiritual authority, is what the book says, the reading says. They were symbols of the benefits of American civilization at that time.
Yeah. In fact, an awful lot of missionary work, an awful lot of medical work, an awful lot of even work in government policy is done by women in this period, right? Mia has also answered this very well. They try to spread the views of a Christian civilization to the less fortunate or to immigrants. Although Mia's right, some women and women's groups opposed imperialism. And by the way, we haven't mentioned today, a lot of groups are anti-imperial, say that it's in fact un-American. This is why we fought the war against the British. Why are we doing this to the Filipinos? That's a very common argument. So this missionary aspect, this civilizing aspect, extremely strong strain of ideology. I haven't seen one, but I'm sure there's bound to have been a women's version of the white man's burden pears soap ad somewhere at that time. I mean, I don't know, because this is technically not my specialty, this slice of American history, but I'd be shocked if there weren't. It would make sense that they were. Okay, because after all, one of the things, don't forget, missionary churches need recruits. They need evangelists. They need missionaries. So the one way to appeal to women to become missionaries is to say you have a special role as women, as mothers, as sisters in Christ, guiding these people towards civilization. But there's that other aspect to it that I was mentioning a little while ago about women's rights campaigners, suffragists. How do a lot of them react to immigration? This maybe isn't so extensively discussed in your book. I talked about it in the lecture, though. It's a similar attitude to what they have towards African American men, freedmen, getting the vote after the Civil War and with the Reconstruction Amendments. What is Susan B. Anthony, by the way, opposes the 15th Amendment, so I'm pretty sure. Why was that? You can almost figure this out just off the top of your head without having read the material. Why would a white woman like Susan B. Anthony be upset over immigration and new citizens coming to the country? Or maybe not upset about immigration technically, but what happens to immigrants when they get here and they become citizens? Yeah, James.
I was going to say probably for the same reasons that a man would. I mean, I don't think that women are excluded from the possibility of being racist, for one thing.
Well, there's that, certainly. Yes. Keep
and
going.
I think someone said in the chat, I thought that was a good point, that immigrants are gaining rights more rapidly than women are. And it's like, why are we prioritizing people who are not born here over women that were?
Yeah, this is what I was getting at. But although that point you make about women being just as susceptible to these racial ideologies as anybody else is important too. Nolan's written in the chat, immigrants are gaining more rights than women who are native born. What specific rights are sorry. Yeah, the voting rights. Okay. I forget when Vito Corleone gets to the United States, but let's say he gets to the United States in 1910. Okay, as a kid. Well, by the time he's 18, let's just say for the sake of argument, he's already a citizen. And therefore he can vote. Why can he vote and not Mary Adams, who's lived in Connecticut all her life, and who descends from John Adams and all John Adams forebearers way back to the 17th century? Why can Vito Corleone, barely speaks English, why can he get that and Mary Adams in Storrs, Connecticut can't get that? I mean, Nolan sort of answered it, but what is still the status before 1920 of women in terms of voting? Maybe this is I'm being too simplistic here. They don't have the right to vote. Okay, so lots of women suffragists, especially Susan Anthony, said, "Look, damn it, I'm as American as everyone else, and my family have been here for 200 years. How can Vito Corleone step off the boat and within a few years he's voting and I'm not voting?" They made this a very similar argument, by the way, against African Americans getting the vote with the 14th and 15th Amendments. Okay, this is getting citizenship and then the vote with African American men. Okay, that being male was more important than your entire family history of being an American. That really drove them nuts, and they opposed the 14th and 15th, but not all of them, because the women's rights movement is very diverse. They think different things, argue different things. Some of them welcome the expansion of rights, and some of them don't, or at the very least say we, white American women, should get them first. Okay. So all these things are constantly going on. As I keep saying in this class, people are paying attention. People are arguing stuff. People are trying to make things work the way they want them to work in the country, and this is another example of that. Do you see what I mean? Try to put yourself in Susan B. Anthony's shoes. Someone, just because he's a man, gets something that you don't have. Okay. Everything else about him is to Susan B. Anthony. Well, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say un-American, but not as American, right? So it's almost as if being a male is the most important thing, not being whether you were born here, and that drives the women's movement crazy. Now they react to it different ways. Like I say, Lucy Stone very much wants to open up all rights to everybody all at the same time, and others want the rights to come to white women before anybody else, in which case privilege is race. So it's just so complicated, it's unbelievable, but it's also the complications are what make it so fascinating. Okay, well, I'm sorry about this sinus infection. We would have had a probably better discussion if we'd been able to do the group work and everything. So until then, I will, but lots of you have contributed very well, so I'm very happy about that. So any questions before I say adios and see you on Thursday? Okay. Adios. I'll see you on Thursday. I'll put this on YouTube as soon as I can.
Thank you.